Unprecedented that a contract that has a signed agreement with USDA would not get their money. Not only a project that's under construction, but any project that has a signed agreement with USDA. USDA has set aside funds for that project that they would not get their money. That's just never happened.
So when we're talking about tax credits, we're talking specifically about the investment tax credit, the 30%, the adders, each of the 10% all fall under that category, as well as the elective pay or direct pay for nonprofits all fall into that. So that would require congressional action to change. They're working on something now. Who knows what that would look like.
Geneva is already making cells in the US, and they have been for some time. We got a couple of shipments of Helene modules which use Geneva cells here in the last couple of months. So we've been able to see this up close and personal, which is really cool to get modules in our hands that have cells made in the US. That's really neat.
Welcome to the In the Loop with Larry. This is our February 2025 edition. Great to have you, Larry.
Yep, good to be here, Warren.
Yeah, we've got exciting stuff to talk about today. We're going to just give a quick update on tax credits and the freeze of some government funding, particularly USDA. We're going to talk about domestic content, and then finally we're going to get into some exciting news about cell manufacturing happening right here, right now in the United States. Let's jump into it. So Larry, let's talk first and foremost about the tax credits and if there should be any concern about the tax credits going away or if they've been impacted by the potential freeze or not.
Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion around Trump's executive order related to the IRA, and rightfully so, but our position is, and we believe that this is the case, this is what we're hearing in the industry, is that funding freeze related to the IRA does not affect tax credits. Anything related to tax credits would need to be adjusted by Congress. Now, to be fair, Congress, as we speak, is working on a bill or two that may have some adjustments to the tax credit in it. Again, our hope is that even if there is an adjustment in those bills, that there'll be a safe harbor period where we're able to safe harbor or start construction on projects that are already sold with contracts signed, and hopefully get them in under the old tax credits. No guarantee, Warren, but that's kind of how we're hoping and expecting things to shake out at this point.
Yeah, so when we're talking about tax credits, we're talking specifically about the investment tax credit, the 30%, the adders, each of the 10% all fall under that category, as well as the elective pay or direct pay for nonprofits all fall into that. So that would require congressional action to change. They're working on something now. Who knows what that would look like? But we have heard some rumbling in the industry that potentially all projects would require domestic content in order to qualify. That's one possibility. Potentially scaling back the length of the 30% tax credit, currently scheduled to go through 2032, may come slide a few years back. So there's lots of chit chatter in the industry, but we don't know what that would look like until something comes out. But Congress is currently working on it, and it does take an act of Congress to get that done.
Yep, that's right, Warren. So we'll have our eyes peeled on the news here in the coming days and weeks to see what happens there.
Yeah. So let's talk really quickly also about the freeze of government spending, particularly as it relates to USDA, because that's what affects us and potentially some of our projects at the moment.
Yeah, so this is kind of tricky because it's unprecedented, Warren, that without congressional action, and even with congressional action, it's unprecedented that a contract that has a signed agreement with USDA would not get their money. Not only a project that's under construction, but any project that has a signed agreement with USDA. USDA has set aside funds for that project that they would not get their money. That's just never happened in our understanding, in our history, in the history of our company, and I think probably in the history of USDA. So that's been confusing for customers because there's this current freeze, and there's some of the judges have ruled against that freeze. So we're going to see what happens with that. But our expectation right now is that those monies that have been assigned to projects will be honored and those funds will come through. That would be our expectation.
Yeah. If you've been watching, it's been a freeze, then a thaw, then a freeze, and then a thaw, and now we're frozen again. But to your point, Larry, it would be shocking if projects that were awarded funds would not receive those funds. And so I think our recommendation is to those who have received funds is to just sit tight and be patient and let this unfold and move your project along accordingly, because it would be highly unlikely that they would not receive their funds. However, what should customers do if they're absolutely worried or concerned over this and they have projects that are about to be installed?
Yeah, so if a customer decides they're not comfortable with where things are currently, certainly reach out to your installer, see if they can slide your project back. I know for us, if you want to do that, we're willing to work with you on that. However, if you get out of our project queue, when you're ready to get back in, it might be a couple of months till we can fit your project back in. So just be aware of that, because we're working on projects as they're ready to go and as they're available. And one other thing I'll just note, Warren, with that is we expect this to kind of work its way through the court system. I think the challenges that the administration is going to have is that, again, these funds were appropriated by Congress and there's signed agreements with the customer. And so those funds are specifically allocated to specific projects. And I think, in the court system, the administration is going to have a really challenging time convincing the courts that they can, with an executive order, renege on those contracts. So that would be our approach.
And hopefully there should be some sort of resolution to this within the near future. I believe the freeze was originally set for 90 days. There's discussions that we may even have a spending bill sometime in March, who knows, or some clarification on this. But I would not expect this to go on for months. My personal feeling is that within the next 4 to 8 weeks, we'll see some clarification on it. And so hopefully we get through this without any further hiccups. But if it were my project, I would not be that concerned if I'd already been awarded the project.
Right.
So let's jump into domestic content, which again falls under the tax credits, require congressional change for that to change. As things stand right now, a notice was released on the 16th of January, which was updated guidance for domestic content. So why don't you give us some insight on what that guidance spells out and how we're handling it?
Yeah, so we were expecting updated guidance. We were potentially expecting the final ruling on this, but it is just guidance, so it is subject to change. So a couple of things came out with the guidance. The first thing was you can safe harbor, you can begin construction within 90 days and fall under the old guidance. So there is a period of time there where current projects can fall under the old guidance if they wish. But a couple of updates for ground mounts, more weight is given to the module. So the module cell, the module frame, the module backsheet, anything made it in the US for the module is given more weight. Essentially what that means is that it's easier to comply on ground mounts with the module than it was before, which is how probably most companies were planning to comply on ground mounts anyway. So that's helpful. It may give us the opportunity to mix and match some modules in the ground mount more than before. So I think that's going to be pretty straightforward. For roof mounts, it gets a little bit trickier. Our understanding is that you can still comply with inverters, optimizers, and racking, but at some point we may need some contribution from the module at some point in the future, depending on what future guidance says. Right now, we feel comfortable that you can comply in the same way as before, but there's now a greater chance, because more weight's given to the module, less weight given to the inverters and racking, that we're going to need some contribution from the module in the future. A couple of good things that they did is they updated some definitions. So prior to this update, we didn't know where carports fit in the domestic content equation, carports and solar canopies. In this last update, they did say that ground mounts, fixed ground mounts, do include fixed canopy structures. Now, we're interpreting that to mean that carports fall under canopies. Carports and canopies are the same thing, would be our interpretation. However, what we're doing for our carport systems is we're asking their customers to go to their tax advisor and work with their tax advisor on this and ask that question. If carports fall under the same definition as canopies, which we know fall under the same definition as ground mounts. So that helped a little bit, but maybe didn't get us the whole way there. The other really good definition update that they did was for fasteners. So under the old guidance, there was this kind of nebulous fastener. What does that mean for racking systems? They updated that for roof mount racking. It's very clear. It's anything that connects the module, the MLPE, and the racking to each other. So that's pretty straightforward, pretty clear. We're happy that they made that update, and that's going to help us to better understand and comply with that requirement.
Yeah, that's exciting. So let's talk about now, when it comes to domestic content, this exciting news about a cell manufacturer right here in the United States already operating and creating solar cells.
Yep, it is very exciting. So the article from Solar Power World that addresses this does talk about the fact that Suniva is already making cells in the US, and they have been for some time. We got a couple of shipments of Helene modules which use Suniva cells here in the last couple of months. So we've been able to see this up close and personal, which is really cool to get modules in our hands that have cells made in the US. That's really neat. So Suniva has a gigawatt of production. ES Foundry is now up and running, and they should have up to 3 gigawatts by later this year, Warren, in Greenwood, South Carolina, which is really, really cool.
Yeah. Now, there's a difference in their business model comparing Suniva, who's working directly with solar panel manufacturers to have their cells built into the panel, versus ES Foundry's approach, where they're looking to partner on large-scale projects with 3 different parties themselves, the developer as well as the manufacturer. So if you could use any panel you wanted to that is on their list that they're working with, and unfortunately that list is not available, but if you were to approach them on these large scale projects, you could have potentially their cell in the module that you wanted and made specifically for that project, which is a really unique approach.
It is, Warren. It's an interesting approach. It has its pros and cons. What I liked about Suniva's approach is that we could just go to Helene. We knew who to go to, and we were good to go. I think ES Foundry's approach works better for larger projects, or is pretty efficient for larger projects. So if you're large enough to buy, hundreds of megawatts or even a gigawatt of modules over several years, go straight to ES Foundry, work with your manufacturer, get them to include ES Foundry cell into your module, and you're good to go. So it's an interesting approach. And we'll see how it shakes out for solar installers like us. I think there might be a fit. I think we might be able to work with them in some way. But I'm just happy to see that there's gigawatts of cells that are going to be made for the US market. Pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of the limiting factor could be if your client is specifically requesting a specific panel that is not on ES Foundry's list. That could potentially be a limiting factor. You'd have to explore other panels.
Correct. Yep. That's the one challenge that I see.
Yep. Excellent. So that's exciting. And we hope to see more and more manufacturing here in the United States, not just of cells, but of solar panels, inverters. And we already see most of our steel is coming from the United States. So it looks like we're well on our way to meeting domestic content requirements moving into Q3 and Q4 of this year and beyond.
Certainly are, Warren. We have some agreements with some manufacturers, some module manufacturers, some inverter manufacturers that we're working with, to get, and even racking, to get some of this product in our hands for our customers. It's a tricky time for manufacturers, Warren, because the domestic content tax credit adder is potentially on the chopping block. That could go away at some point. It might not, but it might. And so that's kind of tricky. But on the flip side, I think that there's an expectation that some level of domestic content is going to be required for the ITC in some way, shape, or form. So I think a company like ES Foundry is making a great decision to make cells in the US. I know that Helene was planning to start making their own cells in the US at some point, in addition to what Suniva was making. And I know they put that on hold because of, the challenges right now with understanding what's going to happen. So, it's a challenging time for manufacturers, and it's really neat to see a manufacturer like ES Foundry go all in and say, look, we're just going to roll with this. We expect it
Absolutely.
to provide value to our customers.
Absolutely. They have confidence in the market. But I think if you look at everything we discussed today, from the tax credits to the domestic content to the USDA freeze, we're in a period of uncertainty with solar right now. I think this period of uncertainty is going to be short-lived. And as soon as we have clarity, we'll be able to move forward with more confidence than what we have now. But I would say that this is going to be a short term, and I'm looking forward to having that sense of clarity here in the coming weeks and putting this all behind us.
Yep, I agree with you, Warren. I think we're going to get some clarity fairly quickly, and we're going to be able to share that with our customers and help our customers move forward.
Excellent. Well, Larry, it's very informative. Appreciate your time today.
Yep. Thank you, Warren.
Thank you.